Welcome to the $1 Million Multi-Op Podcast. Here, you're going to find education, entertainment, and a little inspiration on how to get to the next level. Are you a DJ company owner that's looking for the secret sauce? Congrats, you found it.
What's up, everybody, and welcome to the $1 Million Multi-Op Podcast. And on today's podcast episode, guess what? It's been a whole year of producing podcasts, so I brought on the man, the myth, the legend, the guy behind the scenes of all the podcasts, the one and only Ian Hemerlein. What's up, Ian?
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the podcast, DJ Hemi. Now here's your host, David Osborne.
Oh, God.
How you like that?
Okay, so we just...
I told you I had something for you. I was ready.
This is not a precursor for what you can expect for season 2, year 2. Maybe it is. Ian. Okay, so you just learned very quickly, especially if you're watching on YouTube and you just saw my face, that I have no control over what happens on the production side of the podcast, which is awesome.
I did not tell David that I made that little intro. I definitely didn't spend like 30 minutes last week when I should have been doing more important things, putting that together and kept it as a surprise. Before we started shooting, I asked him, I was like, can I do the intro? And he's like, no, I'm going to interview you, because I had that ready. I was like, okay, well, I'll just hit you with this once you introduce me.
Hit it with me. Yeah, that might be you're going to have Jonathan Simmons doing the opening and then some spice.
That's right.
Yeah, that means you have to be on the podcast every time now, though. But yeah, so kind of why I have Ian on the podcast today is because, you as the listener have heard my voice on this podcast for 52, maybe 53, episodes, a whole year weekly of episodes. We made it consistently through a whole year. And, but there's always another person on every single podcast, and that's Ian. Ian jumps on and gets people ready and does a whole bunch of stuff. Ian, why don't you kind of tell people about what your role is? You can tell people better than I can, I'm sure.
For sure. Yeah. So you guys, if you listen, you've probably heard my name come up in conversation, like, oh, Ian, do this, or in relation to sound effects, because I'd basically say, generally speaking, as a whole, I produce, quote unquote, produce the podcast. So I help with all things tech. So that means that when David invites a guest on, I help to monitor the calls, check audio levels before we get going, play the sound effects. I feel like I used to hit too many sound effects, and over time they've become a little more tasteful. Try not to cut people off when they're talking, but it's all stuff that I've learned, along the way. And other things too. Like I feel like I help you with decision of theme for podcasts. Like we set aside time after and talk about, what was really the most important substance that came out of a talk. Yeah. And then of course, like editing after, some editing and some publishing and all that stuff. So there's a lot of just like logistics that go into a podcast. I think, unless you've worked on one that you might not think have to happen, they all take time. So that's kind of my role, just to assist and make the logistics kind of happen.
Heck yeah. I think when we set out to do this, or I guess when I set out to do this like over a year ago, part of it was figuring out how to make this whole machine consistent, how to say, okay, we want to do this every week. There is no chance in a million years that I have the time or the bandwidth to find the guests, which, create questions, interview people, and then do all of the editing. And even if I could do the editing, I can't do as good of a job as you do. That's like a skill set that you just happen to have outside of, our ecosystem at Sound Insight. And what we didn't mention before is that Ian is one of the DJs on the Sound Insight team. So we work together in multiple capacities. And so like I was like, Ian is a great fit for this because we are aligned in the DJ side of things. Like we work and run on the company side together. We talk daily, so producing a podcast it's almost like we kind of know how each other think at this point, which is pretty cool. Okay, so we go through this all the time. We have, the plan is, the magic behind the curtain here is that when we produce the podcast, we tell people, hey, we're going to record for about 30 minutes. And, I send them some questions ahead of time. some different things like that. But I think it's really important to pause for a second and just kind of remind everybody like the whole purpose of the podcast. It's like episode 1. If you go back in time, I see the analytics. I go and look at it all the time. Very few people listen to that episode. They start on like episode 2 with Josh Staley and they go from there. But that first episode was like, hey, who's this podcast for? Well, it's an important one because this is, people hear the name $1 Million Multi-Op and they just assume, hey, this is a bunch of billionaires talking to people. This is just not even the case at all. The whole purpose of this podcast is to help DJ company owners have stronger, more profitable businesses that could reach 1 million if that's the path you want to go on to, create a scalable company. And again, like kind of what makes Ian so uniquely qualified to help with this podcast is that that's the conversation we have like daily in our multi-op. So I just wanted to clear that up, make sure that there's some qualification of like, this is a real team effort here. What are some things, Ian, that you feel like you've gotten out of this process? Like from a year ago to today, how has your perspective changed or anything changed in 12 months?
I mean, I feel like in my own journey as a DJ and working in the entertainment world, with you, David's basically been my mentor and employer for a little over 3 years now, and there's so much of what I know about how this stuff works and how my job works and events and stuff comes from your perspective, which is like a lot of great stuff. But it's sort of objectively allowed me to step back and see how much bigger and wider everything is. It's sort of almost like going to like a conference or something and you're like, oh wow, like I'm in my job every day knowing how we do things and what we believe and what's important to us and what we're working on. But no, it's been pretty eye-opening just to see and hear so many other perspectives from other multi-op owners and other types of people that you've had on the podcast. Like, I mean, you've had like Alan Berg on the podcast, you had like Leah Weinberg, like just other sections and things that work into the industry that has taught me so much stuff that, has given me a much like better, I feel like broader, objective perspective on like how things work. You know what I mean? Not just so subjective and inside, like what Sound Insight does.
I think it gives us the opportunity to have more conversations after the fact. We're like, oh, so-and-so, some great examples is, we had a whole, almost like a little mini series throughout the summer where we had Ed Petty on the podcast. And then we talked about Ed's role as a general manager. We talked about, with Dylan and Michael from Explosive, and we talked about partnerships, and we talked about, there was a lot of discussions about sales versus operations. And like, that's what we do. Like that, we talk about that stuff all the time. We have a very complementary relationship where I do a lot of marketing and lead generation. Ian does a lot of sales. So you're able to kind of look at this through that perspective of like, hey, who are some other people doing some remarkable stuff? We've seen some pretty cool stuff that we want to implement. We've also seen some stuff that we're like, maybe no thanks, but
sure. But
all of it works for you.
Even if there's stuff that comes up, like, when you did the 2-part episode with Explosive and, they really do amazing work with very high end bar and bat mitzvahs. And that's just not something that we're focused on in our market because of where we live in Athens, Georgia, where that scene doesn't really exist. But to hear that, like, oh my gosh, like these guys who do very similar types of service to us, like they entertain people at like a pretty high level, but it's also something that's pretty different. It, like I said, not to sound like a broken record, but I feel like it broadens your horizons and makes you understand, it's almost like traveling or something. Like you travel somewhere new and you're like, you get out of a rut of where you live, and you're like, man, there's so much other stuff out there. And it just helps you to learn and grow and have a better perspective on all things that you do in your work.
Yeah. And I think I expected that to happen when we set out. I expected you get to be in a very unique position where you are sitting in a room with two a host and a guest, but you're in the conversation. You're not just listening to the conversation like everyone else is. You are on this call. You just have your video muted and your mic muted, and we can still see Ian's little icon while we're recording, and he's sitting there at his computer paying attention, firing off sound effects. So he's having to attend to the conversation. And then I would say even more importantly, you get a second go round because you then edit the podcast and make it nice and tight and, get rid of some of the spaces or some of the little parts or pieces or whatever, just kind of make it nice and cohesive towards a theme. So you're getting an opportunity to like work with the material before we publish it.
Totally. Yeah. Ian is always watching.
It is and the solo cast. Okay, so here's the fun fact. Here's another behind the scenes part of this conversation is the interviews are very produced, meaning we schedule with the guest. I come up with questions. It's edited, and edited for content, not just for audio, and everything's balanced well. And then we have a meeting after and we talk about the theme and all that stuff. And then the solo cast that follows it is so different. Ian's basically like, hey, hey, David, I need your solo cast for this week so we can upload it. Yeah. So he just runs it through the same presets, but there's no content editing on the solo cast. I just give him a file, and that's me probably just, sitting in shorts and a t-shirt in my office. Sometimes at 6 o'clock in the morning, firing off something to hit a deadline for Ian. So, you have him to thank to make sure that stuff gets done on time.
Yeah, we need to start including the videos of the solo cast. I think we want to know what you're up to at 6 a.m.
You please don't. I am usually looking rough. There was that time I had a tattoo. I got a back tattoo, and I had like wear a hoodie backwards with no shirt on. That's definitely a solo cast that happened. And I think Ian even messaged. He's like, "What are you even wearing?" And that because he sees the video. It's on. We use Riverside, so you can see the video. I guess I could have turned my video off, but I was like, we're all family over here. Okay, so I'm actually really excited to hear your answer to this next one. Another disclaimer. I don't know any of Ian's possible answers to these questions. We did not discuss ahead of time. What is one thing that listeners would be surprised to learn about the way we produce our podcasts and or what happens on these podcast episodes?
I do have an answer for that, but I think unfortunately you might have already spoiled it because my answer is basically people might be surprised to find out just how much effort is put into it, including all the planning beforehand, all of the structure. And I say that because I feel like I have just listened to quite a few podcasts myself that are so off the cusp and just so like we're just talking and you can tell from the tangents they take and like the left turns and stuff that they take that like there's definitely not as much planning that goes into it. And like that can be very great too. Something that's more conversational and kind of just fun, I definitely like to listen to podcasts like that myself. But I feel like part of the point of this podcast, like you've always thought from the beginning, hey, we're keeping it to most of the time, like 30 minutes, give or take a few minutes. We're going to try to, I feel like there's a big emphasis on trying to maximize like the value constantly. So that's all part of the editing process too. Like I don't just edit out like something awkward or like a weird pause, or if someone's like, oh, we need to backtrack and I don't want that in there. But also just if I feel like it kind of the conversation veers off too far into something that's not going to be beneficial for listeners, that's something that I would like cut out. Because again, I think what people might be surprised about is like how much, what's the word I'm looking for? But I guess how much intention is like put into the education aspect of it.
That's a good way to put it. And one of the things, I didn't do this at the beginning. It's something that maybe halfway through, sometime in the winter maybe, or early spring, I started doing with podcast guests. And if you were a guest and you were listening and I didn't do this for you, so sorry. But most people I did it for is I when I send people the potential questions a couple of days ahead of time, I also will send kind of what I want the big takeaway to be for the listeners. For example, like the Jeremy Breck, because it's a pretty recent one and it's in my mind. I know Breck is like wildly creative and he's good at a lot of stuff. So like I wanted to make sure that we could talk about the way he does that, or like the way that he, that's kind of the big takeaway. And that's what I focus the questions on. Or when I talk to Malik, and he's a master at branding, master at like social media. So the big takeaway is I want people to understand why brand is so important. And I send that to them in a message. This is what I want the listeners to get out of this. And so it helps keep us focused. It helps keep us from, I agree with you. I listen to podcasts that people just bullshit all the time, and it's fun. It's totally a fun vibe. And we could do that. I think this specific episode is a little bit more like that because we know each other so well. And, but for the most part, this isn't a storytelling based podcast. This is about
Right. And
learn something.
And I also know that from being so involved and seeing the questions before sometimes and going over things and having a plan, I know that there are definitely times where you'll have a guest on and the conversation will go somewhere that you didn't expect, and you totally can roll with that and do if it's something that's worth exploring and it's interesting. Like there definitely have been times where you're like, when I had like 5 more questions that we just didn't get to because we went off on that, and it ended up being interesting. So that does happen. But it's not like the plan that's set out. There's always like a plan that's laid out beforehand. That's like, hey, let's try to follow this roadmap if we can. So there is some structure. Because also another thing that's like interesting, I guess, that I've noticed about the podcast is like every person, it's like life. Every guest is a little bit different, and some people like just want to kind of answer the questions back. Some people are a little more, I don't know what you would call it, maybe just like outgoing or confident. Like it's definitely a weird thing. I can feel it right now, hitting record and being on the podcast. But some people probably inherently are more or less afraid to be like, I'm going to start talking about this and just going off. Whereas some people, I think, just want to kind of answer your questions and be respectful and let it go where it goes. So
totally.
Yeah.
I think that, if you go back and listen like the first 3 to 4, maybe even 5 interviews, like Josh Staley, Kristen Hubbard, Justin Reed, Chris Hintz, like some of those early podcast episodes, I remember those ones. I was blown away with the nature of this podcast and it having to be so themed and having such a deliverable takeaway that it required an extra gear in my brain to host it. I was not expecting that at all. I was like, oh, I just talk, it's cool. I'm good at talking. But to be able to have a list of questions, right now I've got 7 questions for our time together right now. We're not going to get to all of them, I'm sure. But I got a list over here. I got a flow. But to be able to for me to keep in mind what the big takeaway is, for me to guide a conversation, but also let a guest shine and be themselves and give the world some great information. It's like another level of management. I'm like, I got to think about this and that, and then my own face, my own facial expressions, and what am I doing? It took me some months to finally start getting very comfortable with it. So I've definitely learned. I kind of thought your answer was going to be how much wild stuff gets said before we hit record and after we stop recording.
That's definitely true too.
Yeah. I will give no examples, but I'll just say we get on a call,
everybody, I think it's I don't think it's a bad thing though. I think everybody to a certain extent has a way that they want to be perceived, especially when they're talking about their business and their work. And if you're talking more to an audience and not just your friend that well, one-on-one, there are certain we can't help it. That's just how people are. There's certain ways that you put on. I would talk even probably a little bit more informally if you and I were just, talking about whatever, but we're on a podcast and, still work, and I should put on at least a little bit of best face without being fake. Yeah. You call Ian what?
I think I call you every day, sometime in the morning, probably when I'm leaving Orange Theory or something.
Yeah, and probably when I'm waking up.
Yeah, honestly. Every conversation that we have, it's I might call Ian to have a question about some event that we're booking or a clarifying question about a thing or staffing a thing or just something that we're dealing with. And I guarantee you the first 5 to 10 minutes has nothing to do at all with what I call him about. And then we just tangent and I'm like, oh, wait a minute. We should probably talk about what we're going to talk about. We ended up laughing and making jokes about things. So that's a different episode.
We have fun.
Yeah, I think we have fun
here.
Yeah, we do. I definitely tried to make sure we hit all 5 scaling essentials in a year. That was a big deal for the whole year. And then I also think that there was some great guests. Some of the most popular guests, which I wasn't expecting, were the non-DJ industry folks. I mean, there's definitely some people in our industry that got much higher analytical numbers, which again, I will not tell you who, but some of the folks that were not DJ industry people, like Leah Weinberg with the lawyer talking about legal stuff, Chad Brown, exceedingly high analytics. He talking about the 3 biggest mistakes you can make with money in your multi-op. Oh my gosh, that is wildly popular. Chad is super smart.
Very smart.
We, just people that are outside our industry offer a really cool, unique perspective. We have an interview coming up with a guest that's outside of our industry that I'm very excited about coming up in the next few weeks. So like, that's going to be another good one. But that's a way it's evolved, is that you start to find out that there's a lot of value inside and outside our industry. So
can I ask you a question?
Yes. Hot seat.
What has been your biggest takeaway as like the person hosting this podcast and putting it together? Basically, like, we're 1 year in. What do you think is like the biggest thing you've personally taken away from it?
The thing that's a tough question, I think. So I think biggest takeaway is I have a few. Can I give you a few?
Absolutely.
Okay. Ooh, when the interviewee becomes the interviewer.
Do me a favor too, in the way that you phrase it. Say it in a way that I could make a really great reel from it. Like, don't just answer it. Say like, my biggest takeaway is.
My biggest takeaway is that the things that I talk about on the podcast are things that we actually do in real life behind the scenes, and Ian and I talk about all the time. Meaning, we live what we talk about on this podcast. For right now, it's clearing my throat. Excuse me. That the biggest takeaway is just that, like, we as a company have grown because of this podcast. And I don't mean like scaling necessarily. I just mean that it's almost like having weekly accountability to myself. I'm going to get on this podcast and tell y'all about something cool or teach you something. And I'm like, man, if I'm telling everybody else that we got to be doing X, Y, Z, we should probably be doing X, Y, Z. Like, it's a good fire under my ass to make sure it's an invisible accountability partner out there in the world that I want to not just talk the talk, but walk the walk. How are you going to give me a power up when this is your podcast?
I haven't said anything that interesting or insightful yet.
Hey, you
got to hit me with some realer questions. You got to hit me with some like crazy questions, and I can dole out some crazy wisdom or something, which I don't have any of.
You have lots of crazy wisdom. What are you talking about? Another takeaway is that you and I make a really good team.
Wait, hold on.
The third takeaway is someone needs to take away your privileges for sound effects. And then the other takeaway with, and I'll say this in the most genuine and humble way that I can, because in my brain it doesn't sound humble, but we do a really good job at our company. And I think talking to a lot of guests helped me realize that, in fact, we got a pretty good thing going on here. And I don't mean that as a slight to anybody else. It just means like we can easily be in the same room with a lot of the big players in the game, because I see what they're doing and what we talk about before and after recording, and then what I know we're doing. And I'm like, okay, I feel really good about what we're doing as a company. And there's also a lot of international listeners. Did not expect that. We have a pretty big contingency in Australia. That's Glenn Mackay is one, but there's more than him. There's several in Australia. So shout out Australia. Feel free to fly us to Australia to be part of a conference.
It sounded like you were almost like starting to do an Australian accent, but then you were like, no, I'm not going to.
See, this is how aligned we are, because it crossed my mind. You probably saw a flash in my eyes, and then I was like, David, that's one of your worst accents. It'll sound like they all end up going to the same one after a while.
Thank you, Australia.
That's, didgeridoo. That's
not being edited out.
No, it shouldn't be. You're not editing a single thing on this podcast. Okay. So, this is a behind the scenes podcast. And I think a really cool thing that we can chat about for a few minutes is kind of like, okay, so people, we've talked about you as a podcast. producer, and how you do have some engineering chops before working with us, but like you have a giantly, maybe you should edit out the word giantly. You have a giant. You're not editing it out, I can tell.
I'm cutting that
This
out.
is going to be the most listened to episode. People are gonna like, should I listen to this one? We're gonna have to name it something. So we're gonna have to name it like David started an OnlyFans. People are like, what? Okay, see, this is where I digress. Okay, so you've been a super success story at Sound Insight. You were a product of our budget brand system. You're a product of the blueprint. You're a product of mentoring practices. So when people come and see me speak on stage about stuff or blah, 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 you lived it. You have gone from not DJing to being like highly sought after in our market and a absolute stallion in the stable. So kind of what, how's that, talk about that. Talk about like kind of your journey and just kind of how you've, I don't know, I'm gonna stop there.
Sure. Well, I guess just talking about my own journey. So like I said, I think I said it before, but I met David close to like over 3 years ago, maybe close to 3.5 years ago now. And my background is I really used to, I never grew up being like, man, I'm gonna be a DJ someday. I've been playing music since I was a kid, and I played in bands, and you know, playing in bands in like high school into college then led to I started going to studios to record music with my bands. And that was like my life. That was my whole thing. It was just like loved playing music with my friends, making songs, doing stuff. And then when I went to the studio, I really fell in love with the actual process and production of like making stuff there. Like it felt like this really like tangible like thing, like I was always kind of like an artistic kid and like to draw and stuff, and liked music, but it was just something that like it kind of just the production and like making stuff. It like was a meeting of all these things that like I was really, really into and still like really love. And so that's really what I wanted to do. I was just like, I started working at a studio in town and started recording other people and starting to grow stuff. And I found out pretty quickly that it's a really like hard actual job to have. There's, looking back on it now, there's like so much more that I know about like running a business too, that I've learned from David and being a part of Sound Insight that probably would have made me better at that side of things, and it's a very common field. I'll just call it like audio work, but like it's very common to see that people aren't so great at the business side of things. The people who do really well are great, I'll say it, engineers, but they're also they become pretty savvy with running a small business. I just needed to make more money. I needed another job. And so I didn't really want to go back to, I worked service industry jobs, I worked coffee jobs and stuff. Didn't really want to go back to that again. I'd stopped doing that. And I just found I found an ad for DJing locally. And I like looked up the company. I looked up Sound Insight, the company. The intention at first was 100% to just make some extra money, see if I could do that. I thought, DJing, like I could probably do that. Like I really like music, I play in bands and stuff. I could probably do that. It's probably not hard. Was humbled many times quickly and learned like, oh, this is actually a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. But I really liked all of the challenges it presented. And then on a less conscious level, like I was like growing a lot as a person, like obviously as a DJ, but also like as a person and just like as an employee and stuff. And it taught me a lot of things that I didn't really realize it was. So that part of it was really cool. And then as I did it more, I kind of was like, I could honestly use more work. I needed more money. So David mentioned that he could use some help with his warehouse space. And I just like called him one day and I was like, hey, I've been thinking about leaving like another job, but I probably shouldn't do that. Like I'm trying to do this audio thing and do your gigs. Like, do you have more work? Do you need help? And he was like, absolutely. Let me think about it and call you back, in a week or something. And then started helping with the warehouse. And then next thing I know, we had a need for some help with sales. I started doing all this within our budget brand and was still DJing for the budget brand. And then next thing you know, there was an opportunity after a bunch of gigs and working hard at it to eventually hit some milestones and go to the bigger company. And then it was like, hey, if you want, you could take over some help with the sales there. And so it's just like, now it's all I do. Now it's full time and
Hit the level up.
oh, okay. Hold on. Is that a level up?
You're the first full-time employee of this company other than me. So, I mean, that for us is in growth is awesome.
Yeah.
And that's how we were able to start having full-time employees. And now Canon's full-time, which is awesome. So, we are doing the thing, but like what it took was, and, for people that are listening that are in, the owner position, or you have no full-time staff, or you're trying to get into that first hire, it's finding the right person that has the right skills. And we vet people pretty heavily to be DJs, but one of the things that I always pointed to, well, two things I pointed to that I knew Ian had a different skill set on top of DJing, and it still was impressive. I would always get to like the coffee shops to meet people for interviews 5 minutes before we were supposed to meet. If we're meeting at 9 a.m., I'm getting there 8:55. I want to see you be early or late. Like, I want to see that. I still do that. I showed up at like, I don't know, 8:53. Ian already had coffee, was like reading a book. And I was like, how long has this kid been here, man? Like, what in the heck? You beat me to the freaking interview. So I was like, that's impressive, first of all. And then second was when you went through the blueprint. And I'd say that the standard behavior of most students in a blueprint program is they binge things. They're like, oh, here's your deadline. They do it like the day before the deadline. That's like pretty typical human behavior. I always say like, oh, Christmas is the 25th. A lot of people go shopping on the 24th. Like, people do that. You didn't do that. You were the kind of guy who was like, I could see it in the course activity. You'd be like, lesson 1, Monday, lesson 2, Tuesday, lesson 3, Wednesday. And I was like, This ain't the norm for DJs. So I noticed pretty early that you were very self-disciplined and had a really good, strong work ethic, and you could handle administrative tasks very, very well, like clerical tasks, which again isn't a commonality in DJs. Mm-hmm. So when we had and then when you started the warehouse, you crushed that. You were very good at that stuff. You were also very patient, as at that time we didn't really have many systems for that. So you're willing to be patient to allow me to build them as we went. And then when our administrative assistant left to pursue bigger endeavors, and I needed to have a need for, admin and sales, I was like, well, yeah, you're a great fit for it because you already have that skill set. And then so everything I've ever given you, you've done really well at because it's in your skill set. And I understand what Ian's strengths and weaknesses are, and I give him things that I know are his strengths, and he destroys them in a good way. I shouldn't say destroy. He crushes them. That's the cool way to say that.
That's the cool way to say it. Yeah. Basically, my strengths are everything and my weaknesses are nothing. Hold on.
Just lost 5 subscribers.
There's plenty of things I'm not good at, but just lost 5 subscribers.
No, but for real. So and that's been, this first year, 2024, was the first year that we had a really fully functioning full-time salary model based on events and office work and sales commissions. That I didn't invent that idea, but we really tried it this year. And then Ian and Canon both have been really cool about being like, this is all kind of like a beta project, an experiment. We're trying it. And then 2025, we're going to make some more adjustments because we found a better way to do it. And then 2026, we'll probably find a better way to do it. And that's another key thing is like, we're all trying to work towards a big goal, kind of bigger than ourselves, which is pretty cool. We all want to make a healthy living doing something that we love doing and not feel like work. So,
yeah. And I would say too, I know we're probably running out of time here, but the thing that is interesting about like skill sets and whatever, where I ended up landing and what is a good fit for me, a common thing that I feel like I've noticed between myself and you, Canon as well, is like, I always felt like coming from feeling more like I had like a artistic personality and being into, the arts and stuff like that, as much as I love that stuff and whatever, like a lot of the people in those spaces, I always felt like just didn't feel like they were like me in some ways. Like I've always had like that inclination, but a lot of people that are so, it's like the left brain, right brain, that are so into being creative and stuff just are really hard to manage, like managing talent and bands and stuff. And, it leads into DJs, but I feel like the people that are able to like be really successful at something like being a high-end wedding DJ, which requires, you to have all of the soft skills and be good with people and be punctual and be friendly and like be organized, but also like, you have to understand music, and like the more creative you can be with that, like the better you're going to be. It's a hard thing, I think, to find someone that can kind of like fit both of those. I'm not trying to like be like, and I can do that, but I do think that like
Yeah.
I've also always like I've always been like a rule follower, and like I've always wanted to impress people and like do the right thing, and like was a good student and those sort of things, but while also having those like inclinations to be interested in that stuff. A lot of times it's just like you see people that are kind of one or the other. I know you're very much like that too. Like you're super great with all of the time management, the business side of things, the being organized, the being great at communication, while also being like a phenomenal DJ and like creative person too.
Yes,
Yeah.
queen.
Yes, queen.
Anyway, I just think that that's like a commonality between the people, in all the people that have been like the most successful that we've worked with.
Heck yeah. That's nail on the head and the way to end this podcast episode. You guys, Ian, you tell people, do you want people to find you online? I always ask how people should find you.
Sure. If anyone wants to,
one of Ian's sick mixes.
If anyone wants to find me online, I mean, the best place is just to follow me on Instagram. I've been branching out more. My Instagram is more of a personal thing, but it's definitely growing more into like trying to, be a little more big boy and professional and follow some other companies and DJs and stuff. So it's just at my name, at Ian Hemerlein, which IANHEMERLEIN, as in Nancy, as my dad would say. If you can keep up with that and you want to follow me, give me a follow. I'll follow you back. And
Ooh.
maybe. Well, maybe not.
We'll see if you make
Maybe
the
not.
As always, everybody, free resources at blueprintlearn.com/resources. And we're excited wrapping up this 1 year of podcast, and we're excited to see what we got in store for, some people call it season 2. I'm just going to say year number 2. Does that give us permission to take a break if there's like seasons and chapters?
I don't know.
Perfect. We'll decide later. Okay, guys, thanks so much.